Hayden Panettieres just lost her life shortly after exposing everything that she had to deal with, all of her struggles, some of that including what she dealt with in evil Hollywood. In this video, I'm giving you the details of her death, as well as details that we pulled out from an interview that she did just 3 months prior to losing her life. Thank you guys so much for being subscribers and supporting the channel. Now let's dive into all the details. Actress Hayden Panettiere just died only 3 months after brutally exposing dirty Hollywood. All the things that we typically talk about here on the channel, all of the crimes, all of the evil things that Hollywood partakes in with their young actors and actresses were exposed. And shortly after, she's now gone. I'm going through this unfortunate news with my morning coffee. Let me know what you guys are drinking. Now let's dive into this story.
Is all of them. All of them.
You write about a moment in your career where a friend of yours takes you onto a boat. You're led to a room which has an older man in it, and then basically told to perform acts and,
Oh, yeah. Perspective completely shifted, and I realized that I was in danger. But by the time I'd realized I was in danger, I was quite literally out to sea.
Now, keep in mind, this did not take place when she was 36 years old. This took place 18 years earlier when she was only 18 years old. There was a trusted woman who put her in a room with a trusted man where really terrible things were about to happen.
And it was that moment shook me and was shocking. And I was quite literally walked down, and I had been having a great time. There was no hints of anything like that happening. So it took me, I was shocked. It took me by surprise. And it was led by somebody that I had grown to trust and see as a protector and somebody who had my back. And to be walked down, down the stairs, and it was as like a surprise, presented as though it was like a surprise, and it was this very small room, and she physically put me in the bed next to this undressed man who was very famous and had his hands like this, like this was just an average day.
Now, we're not talking about Jeffrey Epstein because this sounds very similar to the massage sessions where the masseuse would come in, he'd be laying there under a towel, completely naked, waiting for the massage, which would turn into something much, much more, much, much uglier. This happens in Hollywood everywhere. As we will soon see Stephen Baldwin say, this is everyone inside of Hollywood. It's not just one man and one woman. This is running rampant.
For him, this is something that happens all the time. And I waited for her to leave, and I mean that lion in me, that fire in me, that my hair stood on end, and I became ferocious. I was like, this is not happening. But I had nowhere to hide, and I bolted, and I hid wherever I could think of to hide on a boat. There was no jumping off and swimming away, and there was nobody who was going to. I realized that there was nobody who was going to be empathetic to my situation, that this was nothing new to them.
There's no one that was going to be empathetic to her situation, because what we all need to open our eyes and see is this is the norm. This is what happens to actors and actresses that are in Hollywood. Now, Hayden has been in the industry since she was a very little girl, essentially the majority of her life, and she starred in many roles in large movies and large shows. I mean, pretty famous. She, in this interview, unleashes some of the deep pain that she's been carrying from working in this industry. This could be a bit hard to watch.
The abuse, the fact that I allowed this person not only into my life, but for how long I put up with it. This is a topic I've been journaling a lot about it, trying to organize my thoughts and my feelings. And I did journal last night, and for the first time, I really feel like I was able to put into words what has been going on for the past decade of my life in regards to the abuse. And I was actually going to ask if I could read it because this topic is really important for me to word properly.
Yeah, please, yeah.
So she's literally reading us her journal right now where she discusses the pain that she dealt with. And what's the most disturbing to me is that she dealt with this pain for a decade. And this is what a lot of people that are put into these positions, a lot of victims, whether you're famous or not, it's difficult to escape from the victimizer. And she's a great example of this. And when you're in Hollywood, it's even more difficult because if you try to escape, you have that concern that you're no longer going to get any jobs. You're no longer going to be famous. You're no longer going to have work, and your career could essentially be over. So let's see what she has to say.
It took me a long time to finally see the situation clearly. I've had to do a lot of soul searching and therapy around this topic because allowing somebody to get away with harming me was so unlike me. The more I thought about it and analyzed it, the more connections I made between the abuse I was allowing to transpire and the abuse I've gone through in my past. They say that you end up marrying one of your parents, and no, I'm not married, but I found a very interesting connection between this abusive behavior and my mother's abusive behavior. Even though they would both shake their heads and say I was crazy to think there was anything similar about the two of them, there definitely was. I realized that I was more afraid of being alone than being abused. And in order to be around that kind of behavior, it took me dulling my senses and numbing myself with substances in order to silence that rational voice in my head that was telling me exactly what was going on and the many reasons why I needed to get myself out of this toxic relationship and as far away from this person as possible. Somehow, every time I found the strength to get away from my abusers, they would always find their way back into my life one way or another. It was like being on a hamster wheel in this endless dizzying cycle. And the craziest part and the hardest part to understand was that the physical abuse would come out of left field, but it was always when he was drinking, same as my mom. We could be dancing and joking, then a switch would flip and suddenly it was on. Something would snap and it was like watching a predator suddenly smell blood.
Now, she mentioned drinking. A lot of times this type of stuff happens when people are under the influence, which is absolutely no excuse for the actions to happen. But she mentioned that she continuously had the abusers return into her life. And my question is, were they done with her for a while and then coming back and returning for more abuse? Or was it new abusers that continued to enter the roles in her life? I mean, she already spoke about her mother and then her primary abuser, but were there more people as well?
I was dealing with this Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde situation. I tried to fight back in every way that I could think of. I took every approach from standing my ground to attempting to calm the situation to running and hiding from it until he sobered up. Then, once he was sober, that good part of him would be back, and he would see the damage he had done, and he was devastated and apologetic, and it seemed so honest and genuine that I was torn. I thought back to everything I've done wrong in the past and the forgiveness I was shown. So I think a part of me felt an obligation to be just as forgiving. I desperately wanted to make him a better person. I wanted to fix him.
Honestly, it sounds like she really cared about this man. No matter what he was putting her through, his good, sober side, it seems kind of like she adored him, cared about him like a lover or like a family member, someone that you just deeply care about. And that, I think, is a role that many people that deal with these situations take on. They look at themselves and they question whether the problem is because of them. Are they doing something wrong? Should they show forgiveness to the person that's treating them poorly? Because that person has such a great side to them. Honestly, it's sad.
I'm a really strong person. at my core, and anyone who knows me was shocked that I would ever allow anything like this to happen. I have this bright, powerful light in me that comes on, but then it would dim around that kind of intense conflict. I found myself trying to be smaller and weaker just to avoid a battle because there's no reasoning with the unreasonable, and as strong as I am, I couldn't physically stand up to a grown man. I know I have a big heart, and I always try to see the good in people, so much so that it's been to my detriment at times.
I desperately want to know, one, the woman that she trusted that put her on that ship in that room with this man. And I want to know who the man was. And it's honestly probably one of the head roles or producers from one of the shows or movies that she was a part of, and probably one that was long-standing because this happened for so long. She did say that this man was very famous.
The worst part was that by allowing the cycle to continue, it hurt the people I love who came to my rescue, and I cannot allow that to continue to happen. In order to finally get off the hamster wheel and put an end to the cycle of abuse with him and with other toxic people in my life, I had to remind myself how strong I am. I had to envision the life I want for myself, and most importantly, I had to take accountability for enabling unforgivable behavior. That's the first time I've shared that I'm feeling the weight, this weight come off my shoulders at this moment.
How does it feel to say it out loud?
You know, when you feel so much pressure on your chest and there's that anxiety and nerves, and then you're relieved by something like that, it feels like an elephant stepped off my chest. I feel overwhelmed in a positive way. I feel like I finally did it, and I got to do it in my own words. In this moment, I feel more trust in myself than I have in years. So I got a little bit of me back just now.
That's extremely sad. Knowing that she shared this and finally opened up, and then very shortly after she passed, we have to question, how did that happen? This did not seem like a woman who was unable to handle these feelings, that would have done something to herself. This seems like a woman that was finally beginning to heal. And something that we don't typically talk about is, think about actors and actresses and people that are struggling with different types of abuse. When you're in the spotlight, you have to deal with insane amounts of stress as well. I actually found an example of the stress that she has to deal with just being who she is, while dealing with all of these demons that she's dealing with that she just shared. Let's take a quick look at that.
Hey Hayden, how are you? Can I ask you some questions really quick? For the yacht incident, you said your friend's name is Stella. Is that her real name? She doesn't have an IMDb or anything. And on the set of Scream 4, did you do you said who you did shrooms with? You said you did shrooms? I just wondering.
All right, so that's all we need to see. I don't need to give any more time to this interviewer, if you want to call him that. But this poor woman, just trying to get to a plane to go wherever it is she's going, and she's heckled. This is also something that's wrong with society, that people, famous or not, can be heckled by paparazzi and others with cameras in their faces, personal space being completely ignored, and personal business being completely ignored. This type of stuff, in my opinion, has bothered me forever and just shouldn't be allowed. Again, this is on top. This is a woman who's dealing with so much stuff over the years internally. And then when she's out in society, she can't even relax and enjoy her friends and family because she's continuously being heckled. Hayden is no longer with us. It's devastating. Let's all throw some hearts in the comment section below to show our love for Hayden. 3 months ago, Hayden Panettiere exposed evil Hollywood, sharing with all of us her story of abuse and torture that she had to deal with. 3 months later, she died, and everyone's wondering why. Today we're focusing on completely losing her childhood, her blurred financial roles within the family, and then the exploitation that she had to deal with throughout her life.
What's a childhood memory that you have that you feel defines who you are today?
God, got a laundry list I can think of off the top of my head, but really defines who I am. I think I've been really impacted by the people that I've gotten to work with, and especially when I was at very sensitive ages. Like when I think back to Remember the Titans, as you said, at 10 years old, that experience, that whole experience, everyone on set, and playing that character of Cheryl that felt so similar to who I was naturally as a person. I felt like that really shaped me, really shaped my perspective of the industry, made me feel like now I know what kind of actor I want to be. I want to be generous and I want to be there for people, but this can also be fun.
Yeah, absolutely. I wanted to read from your book, if that's all right.
Yeah, of course.
Now notice, there was a book in the background. She did just publish her memoir talking about her life's experience inside of Hollywood, which clearly exposed many different people, or maybe not people individually, but things that go on inside of Hollywood. And it's actually nice to hear that on Remember the Titans, when she was 10 years old, she had a good experience. And it's not abnormal to believe that as a young 10-year-old girl, she developed and was shaped into the person that she is today based off of the experiences that she had in her life. I mean, all children do. Hers just happened to be on the set of a movie instead of in the classroom.
You say in the book that from a very young age, I lost the chance to have a normal childhood, friends, relationships, and my privacy, because instead of fighting it, I leaned into the talent I was somehow blessed with. And I wanted to ask you, like, what do you think a normal childhood looked like? And how was yours different from that?
Well, to me, a normal childhood looked like extracurricular activities. It looked like going to school, being in school all day long, having a social life and connection with your peers, going home, doing homework, having play dates, having friends over, having those kind of experiences. And even though I did get some of that because I had to live that life and had to be removed from it all the time, whether it was to go to auditions or to go to work, I constantly was missing out on the social aspect of what was going on with I was trying to be friends with them, but when you miss out, and then you sit down, you really have nothing to talk about because I only had my experience and what I did yesterday, which was I was on set or I was in the city doing an audition, and that wasn't something that I could expect anyone around me to understand.
So she was having trouble building relationships and bonds and friendships with other people her age because they just couldn't relate to what her life was all about. They're in school and hanging out with each other, maybe playing sports together, and she's on set with Denzel Washington in Remember the Titans and, experiencing something that they just can't relate to.
So I feel like I got a taste of what a normal childhood would be. And I was on swim team and I did do gymnastics and, occasionally I got invited to a birthday party, but a lot of the times I was left out. So it didn't feel like I had a normal childhood, normal upbringing. But to me, it was, just being able to be a kid.
Yeah. Did you recognize that then?
I did. I remember school was very tricky for me because here I was trying to fit into two different worlds and I was dealing with this massive world, which is the industry, and dealing with big emotions like what you feel after rejection or not getting a role or a ridiculous amount of praise, an unhealthy amount of praise that you get at too young of an age. And then I had the world that I was desperately trying to fit into as well, that I was supposed to fit into, that it should have been easy to fit into. And I couldn't fit into that either. So I was like, where do I belong?
Yeah, it's hard when you're caught in between two different worlds and you somehow, as a very young child, have to somehow make it look seamless and move through these worlds with taking emotions from this one into that and that one into this. And
yeah, and you don't want anyone to see you sweat
yes,
either. You want to you want to be cool, calm, and collected, because being overly emotional around your people that age, like my age, it doesn't go over well. And it doesn't go over well with adults either. So you have to like bottle up all of these emotions.
Yeah, wow. Yeah, it almost feels like when you're with your kids your age, you're just trying to fit in and be cool, but you're dealing with these emotions you're carrying over. And then when you're with the adults, you're trying to make sure everyone's happy and everything's going okay. And
yeah, I feel like the first time I really felt like I didn't fit in, though, was actually when I was in kindergarten, and it was brought on by the teacher not liking me. The opinions of the teachers and the way that the adults saw me was rubbing off on the kids. And I can only imagine what the kids' parents were saying about, their children going to school with an actress at home. But yeah, I was bullied first by a teacher in kindergarten, and then it graduated to first grade was the first time I heard anyone say, raise their hand and say, why does Hayden get to miss school and we don't? And that was the first time I felt like, oh, it bothers them that what I do. And then middle school, which is treacherous as for anybody, but especially as a female, like girls are just really hard on each other. And it wouldn't help when the teacher would roll in a screen and say, hey, we're going to watch a movie during class, and everyone would get excited, and then they'd pop in Remember the Titans. And there I was trying to fit in and just trying to find a seat next to somebody who wasn't rolling their eyes or huffing and puffing about having to sit next to me. I was just trying to blend, and then they were popping that on, and I was just like, is this even legal? Like, can you do this to a kid and a child?
Yeah.
It's actually commendable that she was going to traditional school. I would think that most young actors and actresses, 10, 11, 12 years old, they don't go to normal school. They get homeschooled, and then they would be going on the set. So her trying, she was making the efforts here to be a normal kid in gymnastics and swim, trying to go to normal school. But as you can see, it's difficult to do. People don't look at you like a normal other student, especially when they're young, middle school ages. I used to be a teacher myself. It's just a brutal time in school with bullying, harassment, and just how you're judged by your peers. And it's crazy because I have a video coming out on Macaulay Culkin in just a few days, and he deals with a lot of the similar things that she was dealing with here, and that's because they both started at such a young age.
Was it ever clear what the reason the teacher who bullied you was, or did they ever have any interactions with your family? Or
No, first of all, kindergarten is way too young to really do anything wrong. I remember when the first time she ever bullied me was the very first day of kindergarten, and we were coloring, and they had the crayons in these wet wipe boxes, and they said, wrap it up, everybody close the boxes, and as being kids, it became a little bit of a race of who's going to close it first. And I went to close one, and another girl went to close it at the same time, and it went on her finger. And I apologized profusely, felt horrible about it. And I remember her best friend walked up and said, yeah, but we have to tell on you. And my heart sank, and I didn't know how it was going to go. And they walked up to the teacher and told her, and I looked at her and I said, it was an accident. And she looked right at me and she said, oh, it doesn't look like an accident to me.
Wow.
And at such a young age for that to that's stuck with me, all of these years later.
Imagine being that teacher today, whoever that teacher is that's going unnamed. And something that is not done here is names being called out. She does a nice job of keeping everything bottled up so that no one's actual names are mentioned. I don't know if that's a good or a bad thing. But yeah, our children are influenced at a very young age.
Not all of my teachers were like that. There were teachers that were super supportive, but there was a substitute teacher who came in and she would call me the big cheese in front of everyone. And she said, what, you think because you're an actress, you're the big cheese. And that's so not who I was and so not who I wanted to be. So quite the experience trying to fit in. Disappointed in people. I really just wanted to, as you said, fit in. I wanted to be normal.
Like every kid does.
Like every kid.
Yeah, like all of us do. And as someone, by the way you described it, I had a very normal childhood, and it's hard enough as it is, even when it's, normal. And so when something's making you stand out or someone's pointing things out, especially as kids when we don't have a clue what's going on, and all the other kids in your class who wouldn't really understand how to make context of this, you need an adult to kind of make sense of it.
Yeah. And a lot of it, I felt like it came out of left field. One of the things I'm sure you read in the book is that I kept the notes that were passed to me in school, the nasty notes, and I kept them in my binder and I kept them under my bed. And I think it was because I wanted to desperately to understand what they were seeing in me. And it started the habit of changing who I was to make others happy, to make them like me. And I thought if I could understand where they were coming from or what they saw or what they didn't like, that I could, maybe it was the actress in me and having been directed all my life, that I could change my performance a little bit and it would make them accept me.
So just from her beginning as a child in kindergarten, she was dealing with things that were mentally changing her, teachers that were treating her poorly, notes that were being passed around about people not liking her. She was already being developed to be self-conscious and probably not feel so great about herself, questioning how life is actually supposed to work, being an actress and going to school, being a student, and a peer with all of these other kids.
You've talked about having the pressure to support and provide for your family as well, right? Did you always know that that was your responsibility even then? Like when you're talking about this idea of performing, making sure everyone else is okay,
Right.
I wonder how much of it was something you had to do at home as well.
I want to make it clear that, I mean, my father was a lieutenant in the fire department and he had businesses. So I wasn't supporting the family, but I do remember being very young and my mom trying to explain to me that this corporation that she set up, paid for the cars, the lease on the cars and the cell phone bills because it was a tax write-off.
Right.
And I remember that role reversal being incredibly uncomfortable for me, where I was, on one hand, I was still a kid and I was listening to my parents and had to do everything that they told me I could and could not do. But at the same time, I was working hard, making money, and this money was going towards things that I wasn't privy to. So as my dad would kick my butt if I made people think that I supported the whole family. But then when I got older too, and my mom bought an apartment for me when I was 16 and my whole family lived in it. So again, it was just that very strange, uncomfortable feeling of the role reversal and desperately wanting to still feel like the kid and still feel like I had parents to lean on. I didn't want, even when I was a kid, I was scared of the dark and I would make my dad lay down next to me. And if his head ever went below mine, I would freak out and make him sit up further because I wanted to feel like the kid. That is kind of continued on in my life, just wanting to know that if I found myself in a terrible position that I could call somebody to help me. I could rely on somebody. I wasn't the only person. I wasn't the person that everybody else was relying on, and therefore nobody was there for me.
Hayden definitely seems like she's taken a lot of time to kind of digest what happened throughout her life, probably a lot of therapy as well, because she seems to have a good understanding as to how she was feeling, but not only how, why she was feeling that way as well.
Yeah, I mean, and so natural, right? To want that and to seek that is so real and so natural, especially as a young child and kid. And then, of course, with everything else that you're taking on, there's nothing about that feels anything but what every child deserves and what every child wants and, deeply is looking for. But I know in the book you also write about how there's this sense of what you were just saying about collecting all these notes and not wanting to almost let the kids down and become who they need you to be. It feels like that kind of became your relationship with your mum as well, where you didn't want to disappoint her.
Oh my gosh, that was my entire relationship with her. She was my boss. That's how I saw her. Even though she was the most supportive person when I, did what I was supposed to do and did it well and was the one cheering me on, it did feel like that was what I had to do to get her love. And that was, a tough pill to swallow. Everything was business. Everything was business focused. And I started at 8 months old. I can't even remember a time where she wasn't a momager. Where everything didn't revolve around business. And there were periods of time as I got older where we spent a lot of time traveling and on the road together, and I was the only person there, so I became the confidant and the assistant and the therapist and the shoulder to cry on and everything but her child.
Momager. It's a term I've never heard before. But as I mentioned just a few moments ago, the video I have coming out of Macaulay Culkin, he speaks very similar about his father, how his father only cared about the money that he was bringing in and about managing him as talent instead of being a father. It's nice to hear here that Hayden at least had a better relationship with her mother on top of the manager position that her mother held over her. But still, it's a lot for a child to handle, to know that you have to perform well at your job to earn that praise and that love from your parent.
Have you ever had the opportunity to tell her that and to have that conversation with her?
When I was 19, I finally got the guts got up the courage to split from her as business-wise, because I desperately wanted a relationship with her, desperately wanted her to just be my mom. And so she came into my trailer during lunch when we were filming Heroes, and I said to her, I don't want us to work together anymore. I just want you to be my mom. And I remember being hopeful, but there was that part of me who knew her too well. But I also wasn't expecting the reaction that I got, which was, "You owe me." And that's all she said. And she walked out. And part of me was like, oh, I'm relieved that it was short, like ripped the Band-Aid off. But then it was like this dark looming cloud, over my head going, what does she mean by I owe her? What form of payment is she expecting? And it was disappointing to find out that it was money and that she didn't pursue a relationship with me as just a mother-daughter.
Wow.
Like once the business aspect was removed, I was hoping that if I remove this, then there will be no reason for her to be anything other than my mom. And the fact that it seemed like she didn't care to have a relationship with me was a tough pill to swallow.
As a child, I'm sure you were also, even as a teenager, you're still dealing with the guilt of like, how do I have this conversation with my mom?
Mm-hmm.
Because I'm guessing there was a part of you that was, of course, grateful. And of course,
yes.
like, but at the same time, I hear your intention loud and clear, which is, I just want you to be my mom.
Yeah.
And I don't want you to play another role in my life. And then to not get that other role, even when that part's taken care of it. Yeah. Do you still not connect or talk today?
At the moment, no, there is not a relationship between her and I, sadly. I've gone through periods of time where we haven't spoken at all. It seemed to me it was kind of like there was no reason. She had no reason to call, and the only reason why she would reach out was when something was needed. It wasn't just to say, hi, or how are you, or let's grab a bite, or anything like that. It's been a really tough road, and I've, no matter how many times that door has been slammed in my face, I've desperately seeked her approval for my entire life. You know, she was the person after every take that I looked to. I wouldn't look to the director or the producers or anybody else. The only person that existed and the only person whose opinion mattered to me was hers. So after every take, no matter what I was doing, I would find her. And I'm sure I made, the directors feel like, hey, because I would run right past them straight to mom, and I had to make sure that that she was happy with it and I wasn't in trouble, because if I didn't do it right, I was in trouble. Yeah. It was not a good reaction. But I mean, I've lived to please her, and even though, as you said, I'm incredibly grateful. Here she and I've never had a conversation with her as to why she stopped acting and decided to focus her entire life on creating a career for me, and whether it was just that she felt like I was good at it, which is why she kept me in it, or she wanted to live vicariously, or if she wanted to create a potentially successful future for me. I haven't gotten a chance to really talk with her about that. But I'm very grateful for everything that I have. But it was just very confusing because I never asked for it.
Another instance of a parent trying to relive their past, her mother being an actress as well, through their child. I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing. I love that she was able to teach her daughter this trade that she had some natural abilities for, to be super successful as an actress, and to fuel that and to help her through that. But it gets to a point where the parent takes it too seriously, where they're the momager, and the relationship between mother-daughter or father-son or whatever it is gets destroyed because of business. Business becomes more important than the loving relationship.
And that was the thing. Like, there were times where things would get overwhelming, and I could tell they would get overwhelming for her. And she's a big personality. And I also felt very guilty about us having to spend so much time away from my father, and her having to spend so much time away from her son, my little brother, who was growing up, and that it was because of me. It was because of what I was doing. And it was my fault. And I remember her actually turning to me one night and saying, "You're the reason why I'm missing my son growing up." And, that was a punch in the gut. But as grateful as I was, I wanted to say to her, "But I didn't ask you to take me on auditions. I didn't. I wasn't even old enough to, perceive, to understand anything but good, bad, hot, cold, diaper change, food, that kind of stuff." So there were really high emotions. I loved what I did and I had great experiences, but at the same time I was like, I didn't beg you to give me your life, to sacrifice all of this so that I could have this career.
So her early days in school with her classmates and teachers were really not very good. She was always trying to find her place and actually being hated by many. And then her relationship with her mother was more of a manager role than a loving parent role. Although I'm sure there was some loving parent stuff as well, it seemed to fade away as time went on, and that relationship was just really focused on the career, the success. So even before any abuse started happening for Hayden, she had a very tough upbringing, just being an actress in this space, trying to be a normal person. But now is when some of this abuse begins, as we dive into the terrible things that began happening to her.
And when I got to this part, when you write about this in the book, you write about a moment in your career where a friend of yours takes you onto a boat. You're led to a room which has an older man in it, and then basically told to perform acts and,
Oh, yeah.
And when I read that, I'm like, oh gosh, like not only have you felt like you've had a really unsupported, upbringing, you're now with a friend in the industry and then ending up in a situation like this. Could you talk to me about what that moment does to your psyche when you're that?
I mean, the fact that I was 18, even though I'd lived such a huge life and I thought I was so mature at 18, scientifically, her frontal lobes don't develop until we're, 25, 26. So even though I felt like I could make healthy decisions, safe decisions, I wasn't capable of being fully aware of what was going on around me. And it wasn't until I found myself in predicaments that I realized, my perspective completely shifted, and I realized that I was in danger. But by the time I'd realized I was in danger, I was quite literally out to sea. And it was that moment shook me and was shocking. And I was quite literally walked down, and I had been having a great time. There was no hints of anything like that happening. So it took me, I was shocked. It took me by surprise. And it was led by somebody that I had grown to trust and see as a protector and somebody who had my back. And to be walked down the stairs, and it was as like a surprise, presented as though it was like a surprise. And it was this very small room, and she physically put me in the bed next to this undressed man who was very famous and had his hands like this, like this was just, an average day for him. This is something that happens all the time.
Something that I noticed here, and I said it earlier in the video, how she didn't name her teacher. She's not naming the woman who brought her to the room, nor is she naming the man that was in the bed. She's calling out what's happening in Hollywood and what her experiences were, but she's not actually naming the people. And I'm wondering if that's out of fear. Is she scared to name these people because it would be next level exposure?
And I waited for her to leave, and I mean that lion in me, that fire in me, that my hair stood on end, and I became ferocious. I was like, this is not happening. But I had nowhere to hide, and I bolted, and I hid wherever I could think of to hide on a boat. There was no jumping off and swimming away, and there was nobody who was going to, I realized that there was nobody who was going to be empathetic to my situation, that this was nothing new to them.
And that said as well, that she couldn't feel as if she could confide in someone or get help from anyone on that ship, because this was the norm. This is what happens on that ship. And even bigger, this is what happens in Hollywood. And she realized that at that moment.
I mean, it's such a horrifying event to go through, and to be put in that position at 18 years old.
And disappointing when somebody lets you down like that. And I'd been let down so much before, and that when you really find somebody that you trust, like, you hold on to them for dear life, and you feel so lucky. So to be betrayed like that is just an awful feeling.
So that's the start of Hayden's life, all the way up to when the abuse began. Today, we're going into the pills that she was given before the red carpet, the fame that she had, and how the paparazzi made her feel unsafe. How she lived her life through her TV characters, and how she was banished by the industry, and how she was punished for her honesty. Thank you for subscribing. Now let's dive in.
You're hoping that the adults around you are making good choices. And you talk about in the book how you were actually given pills before a red carpet to make you feel more confident, and how that planted the seeds for so many other things that came in the future. And again, you're coming to a point where you're hoping the people around you, especially when you're young, to help you make better decisions, especially when you start as young as you did.
Yeah. And the person who handed me those pills, I had already developed a very tight relationship and a great bond with them. So when it happened, I didn't see it as anything inappropriate or negative. I trusted this person, and it was not. I didn't just have a great personal relationship with this person, but this person's job part of their job was to always protect me, and so I was so used to following the directions of the people that I respected, the people that I worked with. If they told me to jump, I jumped. If they told me to wear this, I wore that. You know, I trusted them more than I ever trusted myself. I wasn't raised to trust myself except for my instincts as an actor. That was instilled in me. But as a person, it was a completely different story.
If you think about it, she started when she was so young. She was raised by Hollywood, and there were people put in place to make her feel safe, to guide her in the right directions. And when those people are your built-in support mechanics, you instantly trust them, as she did. And unfortunately, yet again, Hollywood lets down a young actor and leads them down the wrong path, which, as was sort of mentioned here, leads to many different things later on in life.
What's going through your heart and mind when that happens in all emotions? What are you experiencing?
The success meant that my mom was going to be happy with me, so that was hugely important. It also meant that I fit in.
Mm-hmm.
That
you found your place.
Yes, I found my place, that I was finally, somebody accepted me, and I was part of something that involved other people, and they became my crew, my group of friends. I finally felt like I fit in somewhere, and I finally felt like, my gosh, I made it.
Another instance of her seeking her mother's approval, which, as we learned in the previous video, she called her mother a momager because her mother was a mother, but also her manager, which leaned heavily into the manager element of it versus the motherly element.
Like, I remember the first time I walked out of my apartment and paparazzi, I was about 16 years old, and I had imagined younger, getting to the place in my career where I would get paparazzi, and what is it going to look like? Am I going to do like one of those, like, no, don't take a picture of me, it's going to be one of those, like, just like be perfectly. Beautiful shots, and it was just sheer terror. I mean,
when
when it actually happened, I heard this clicking, and I looked up, and I remember it feeling like I was looking down the barrel of a gun, and it was a guy sitting in his car with his window rolled down, and I think I was walking my dogs, and I was horrified because I was like, oh my gosh, that's not the look that I expected to have. That picture is of me looking terrified, absolutely terrified, and probably going something like that. That's not the shot you the first want.
You could tell she's an actress, like how she's describing this. You could tell she's actually quite a good actress.
Yeah, definitely.
But that's what happened.
Yeah.
You can plan all you want, and God laughs.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, but you talked about this. You said this at the start. This idea of just like how your life became used to living for applause, like having to get the applause from your mom, and then the community, and then of course paparazzi, whatever. Right? It's like you kind of see that trend.
Oh yeah, and then it grows. And it grew, and it grew, and it went from something that was like kind of cool to something that was incredibly dangerous and incredibly invasive, and not just for me, but for the people around me. It felt like the people around, like I wasn't safe. The people around me were being affected by it. Yeah, I was very protective of my little brother, fiercely protective of the people I love. period. And especially back then when I was 16 years old, it was a whole different ball game. Like the paparazzi situation was crossed lines that still blow my mind today, that they were that were legal. They were able to do the things that were said, the way that they would box you in while you were driving. I remember coming out of a store once, and it was, one person saw me in, and suddenly it was over 100 outside, and they kicked me. I just felt this kick on the back of my leg, and I realized, and when I turned around, they had a camera in my face, and I realized that they were trying to get a reaction out of me. Because I remember a very famous, successful publicist sat me down when I was young, and I think when Heroes was about to change my life permanently, and he knew this, and he sat me down and had a whole conversation with me about how to handle paparazzi and how to keep your expressions, kind of boring, if you will. But the lengths that people will go to get that shot, and the things that they would say to me at such a young age were appalling.
This is terrible, not only for a young actor or actress, but for anyone, right? That's just a complete invasion of privacy. And it's funny because growing up, I remember being in the supermarket line with my mother checking out, and there were always like the Star magazines and the tabloid magazines, and you'd see the pictures of these actors and actresses kind of like she's describing, with some type of a crazy expression. And you never think that those expressions were prompted, that they were kicked, or that something happened to make them make that face. Something terrible was said to them, so they get that shot, and then they can make up that fake story about that person. It's something that we as society, we don't think of, but we buy the Star magazine because we want to hear about the dirt. And a lot of times that stuff's not even true.
They're truly just mind-blowing and shocking. It was just wildly dangerous. And I was like, why? Especially after Princess Diana, how has this not changed?
Yeah.
How has nobody stepped in and stopped this? This is crazy.
How did you cope? And like, what did you do? How did you deal with all of that? Because that just seems overwhelming.
There was nothing to do. Like that was you feel completely helpless. Yes, powerless, helpless. I would get in the car and I drove like bat out of HE double hockey sticks. Like I became a NASCAR driver, and knock on wood, thank God nobody ever got hurt. But there's one time I was out trying to outrun them in a rental car, and I was going so fast down a street that I had to make a quick right turn. I hit my brakes, and instead of the car stopping, it just went for the slide directly into traffic.
Oh, boy.
So I would, I was able to turn into traffic like just in time, in the nick of time. Like I felt like somebody was watching over me, and protecting me at that point. And sometimes I just had to go home afterwards. I went out with a plan to do something, and it wasn't safe, and I didn't feel like dealing with them all day long. So I just went home and would go, you didn't get your shot, but I also didn't get to do what I wanted. When I was living on my own, I remember having to call like taxis at the time. We didn't have Uber or anything up to my house, and I would have to lie down in the back seat, like almost on the floor, so that they couldn't see, the paparazzi that were waiting in the street couldn't see that I was in the car, or have a friend pick me up, and I would have to hide under yoga mats and things like that. I also didn't realize, like, we'd go to somewhere like, let's say the Grove, how many people, or somewhere on like Rodeo, how many people were paid money to do this, to be a celebrity spotter.
Right.
And, you think you've fooled them and you got out of there, and it just takes one person to the wrong person to see you, and there goes your day.
Now, of course, we're taking a look at Hayden and her life and everything that she dealt with up to her death, which was just a few days ago. But this is even a bigger story about something that all Hollywood celebrities need to endure. Paparazzi, and I've been saying it in my last few videos, is a problem. They put people in unsafe situations to get reactions, which, as you just heard from the car chase story, could be something that's devastating to the celebrity or to some innocent bystanders just because someone's maybe trying to escape these overly intrusive paparazzi.
In the part in your book that I found like something that I was totally unaware of, and I'm going to read from it here.
Mm-hmm.
You talk about this is, so while you were on Nashville, you obviously become a mother. And it was this idea that Nashville was almost writing based on your life and writing around you.
Mm-hmm.
You talk about the storylines for your character, Juliet Barnes,
Mm-hmm.
and how on Nashville they mirrored what you were going through in your personal life. And you write this specifically: I was suffering from debilitating anxiety and an addiction I couldn't shake, and I had to live through it twice. First at home as Hayden, and then in front of millions as Juliet.
Yeah.
Wow.
And that really struck me because, you know, I think we all watch TV and film and everything, and we don't really, it's almost like we believe you are that character anyway.
Absolutely.
And you don't really ever know what the real character is until you, and it's, you can in an interview, but if you don't see that, if you only see someone for 3 minutes on a late night show or a morning show or whatever,
right,
like,
you have no
real sense of who they are beyond, oh, well, Hayden and
Yeah.
Juliet, like that's who she is, right? Like
on TV, in what they see, you see in the news, and what you look like.
You see headlines and news gossip and all that kind of stuff. You see the TV show and then you see pictures. You're absolutely right.
That's it.
And that's all you get. And this is why I really appreciate just how, I just want to acknowledge, and for anyone who's going to read this book, like you get to see someone who's, I believe, lived through a lot of hardship, but has this ability to reflect and introspect about what's happening. And when you put it that way and you're like, oh, I didn't realize Hayden's going through this. She's living through the reality. And I want to talk to you about the anxiety that you're experiencing. And then at the same time, you're living it twice because now you're having to act it at work. And they're writing around you being pregnant to have the show continue. And then after that as well. And so talk to me about where the debilitating anxiety was coming from and what it felt like to live it twice.
It felt like it never ended. I didn't know where Juliet began and Hayden ended. In the beginning, when I first started doing Nashville, I thought, well, it's just a coincidence that our lives have so many similarities. It must be. And then as the years went on, the episodes went on, and everything started matching up, from, you know, who Juliet Barnes was dating to being an alcoholic, to postpartum depression, to losing her child, basically abandoning her child.
She gets into
then
it.
it was like, okay, you guys are just mirroring my life. And we would get we wouldn't get the episodes very far ahead of time. So to go to them and say, hey, you got to change this and that, wasn't anything I was used to doing. I was just used to doing my job and making it work. But it felt like the day never ended, and we would shoot 10 months out of the year and 12 to 20 hour days. And I never thought I was a method actor. And I've worked with method actors who, when they play a character role, they never jump in. They don't jump in and out of the character. They are the character for the entirety of the filming process. Shooting something for 6 years, 10 months out of the years, that's not what you want to do. But was unavoidable.
Well, so she was essentially a method actor because her character was her in real life. And some people may say that actually sounds good, right? You just be yourself and you're on camera. But she was going through so many struggles herself. She talked about the postpartum depression. She spoke about the alcoholism. She even spoke about giving up her child, which are things that she was probably fighting internally, which she could never get any reprieve from because it was the same thing happening on the set of the show as well.
Because it was my life. I couldn't come up for air from it. There was no break from it. And here I was playing this very deeply emotional, dark character. We had so much alike, but we were different in who we were as people. But especially when I was on set, even during breaks, I didn't even realize that I was becoming her constantly, and I wasn't therefore taking care of myself, able to take care of myself mentally and decompress and process what's going on in my life, nor did I want to talk about it because I had just spent all day acting it out and crying. I just felt like I was holding my breath all the time and I couldn't get away from it. And, you're in a contract, and I became desperate, and I was doing that's why I turned to substances, because the anxiety that I started having the panic attacks that I started having. I used to have nerves a lot, and I had stage fright. I've had stage fright since I was a kid, but those good nerves that keep you on your toes at some point turned into genuine anxiety that made me incapable of functioning properly or thinking clearly. It would make me physically shake. So I was self-medicating and looking for relief at the bottom of a bottle. And it was the only thing that worked. But I needed to numb. I needed to self-numb. I needed my brain to take a trip. I needed to go on a vacation. I needed it to not think about all these ugly things for just a little while. And I didn't find myself able to do that without the help of a drink.
We look at celebrities, actors, actresses, singers, and we say how they have the best life. They're rich, they're famous, they're living the dream. But we always forget to see the stressors that come along with that fame. We're talking about paparazzi, we're talking about long work days, we're talking about producers and people that are pushing them to do things that they may not really want to do. Being in their positions is not an easy job. Yes, it comes along with riches, which of course everyone wants to be rich. It comes along with fame, which people think they want until they get the fame. But Hayden and many others, we look at them like, why are they so strong? Why are they abusing substances? Why do they need to numb? And I think we're getting a little bit of a look here from this interview as to why many celebrities deal with the same stuff and handle it in the same way.
Yeah, I mean, explain to me the complexity of, and I asked this from the perspective of having so many friends who've gone through postpartum depression and it just not being talked about enough.
Yeah.
And whether it be even initially when it happened, I remember speaking to a lot of my male friends and them not understanding what their partner was going through, only then to realize that we were just unaware of the amount of women that go through postpartum depression. Talk to me about the complexity of the emotion of having your baby girl and the emotions that come with that as being a mother, and then the postpartum depression that follows that.
From as a young age, I was dreamt of becoming a mom. Like, it was something that I always knew that I would be, always wanted to be, and I had all these ideas in my head of the kind of mother that I was going to be. I was gonna have cameras in every room, and I was gonna capture this and that, and I was gonna get them into all these different extracurricular activities and made sure that they spoke different languages, and like, I had this beautiful plan in my head. And then I had my daughter, and I knew something was just terribly, terribly wrong. And now there's a lot of stigma around postpartum, and there's a lot of misunderstanding, and it's on it's on a spectrum, it's on a scale, and fortunately, I never felt any hostility or negativity towards my child, thankfully. But I wasn't connecting with her the way that I knew I should be.
This is something that so many women deal with, and quite frankly, many men don't understand. But it's got to be awful to have this type of a feeling towards your own child. And as we know, Hayden actually gave custody back to the father of the child, and no longer had custody.
You talk about how, like, when you finally did talk about it, you even lost an endorsement deal.
Yep. Neutrogena I was with for 10 years, and I mean, they have morals clauses, which was had a huge impact in my life, because I was a teenager, and I had all the paparazzi around me catching all of these gory moments, like every moment, every cigarette that I smoked, or bad outfit, or oh, she's looking chunky in a bathing suit. Oh, she has a fat vagina. I mean, I went through all of that. They were there for everything. Neutrogena was a huge part of my life. I had the morals clauses. They caught absolutely everything, and of all the things that they would fire me over, this was the last thing that I thought they would ever fire me over. And when I actually went out onto stage, it was live with Kelly and Michael, I had no intention or plan to talk about postpartum depression. It just came up, and I was just being honest. And never for a second did I think that anyone or care that anyone would have a bad reaction to it. It was my truth. And so when I got that call that Neutrogena wanted to fire me over that, and my representative at the time said, that's illegal. You can't do that. And even though, she saved the day that year, I knew that was going to be it. That I was not going to be invited back the next year. And I had worked with these people for 10 years, and I remember not hearing a word from anybody, not a great working with you for 10 years, not a nice
hope you're okay.
Yeah, hope you're good. We wish you well. And I remember that really breaking my heart. I wouldn't change it for the world. I wouldn't take it back. But as I said, of all the things that I had been caught doing, that being the thing that was where they drew the line.
That's actually really surprising, that speaking your truth about something such as postpartum depression would be the thing that you lose your job over, especially with a company like Neutrogena. You would think that they were more about speaking up about things that women are dealing with, but apparently not.
And it was immoral, was shocking to me. And it made me realize and understand exactly what people thought of women who experience postpartum depression, and how misunderstood it is, how much stigma there is around it, and how, we're already in pain. We are already like the worst possible thing. One of the worst possible things in the world to happen to a woman is already happening to her. The last thing we need is, the icing on the cake, and feeling so judged and in such a negative way.
What do you want people to know about postpartum depression that you think they miss?
That it's real.
Mm.
That it's not something we make up. It's not something we want. It's not, that we've lost our marbles, and it's not something that we want to go through, and we're not lying when we tell you something's wrong, and we're in tears for absolutely no reason. Like, we don't have control over this, and this would be the last thing that we would ever want to experience or go through. We want to be with our child, our brand new child, and be filled with joy and feel like the luckiest person in the world, and capture every moment. And for anyone to think otherwise is just misinformed. And I think people need to know a lot more about it.
So she endured bullying, massive anxiety, substance abuse, postpartum depression, not to mention all of the abuse that she endured from when she was 18 and on. This is not just a story about Hayden, it's a story about many people inside of Hollywood and what they have to endure. Today we're diving deeper into the abusive relationship that she was involved in and the stalker / fame related danger that she was put in.
You talked about this and you were mentioning it to me earlier. You talked about, surviving your abusive relationship with your ex.
Yes.
And I wanted to ask you about, because like I said before, it's like every time you go further in the book and deeper in the book, I can tell that you know your truth and you know who you are. And as you said earlier in our conversation today, you were like, but I don't know if I'm always good at knowing or trusting my gut or following through on it.
Yeah.
Why do you think that is?
I feel like I've let myself down so many times and let other people down so many times. And I've just, I worked so hard to create this incredible life and career, and I basically burnt it all to the ground, essentially, and had to, start climbing up that mountain. And it happened, more than once, and having to try to get out of my own way was the most difficult part of it. It was almost like I would self implode and destroy something good that I had going on before anybody else got a chance.
I'll tell you, throughout this entire interview and all the previous episodes that we've done, she's very aware, self-aware of where she was, how she made mistakes, and what was going on around her, which is why I mentioned in one of the previous episodes that she clearly has done a lot of self-reflection, found herself in a better place, apparently, and probably got herself some therapy along the way or some type of help.
It was like, instead of setting myself up for failure, I knew I was going to fail. So I was going to just, it might as well happen sooner rather than later. And it made me stop trusting myself. I mean, I wasn't even raised to trust myself, as I said before. Like, my instincts, aside from my instincts as an actor, as a human being, I was not I was not taught to really trust myself. I was taught to trust these people around me. It's been a really long road and a really hard road, and a really stressful road, trying to get back to that trust I had at one point when I was younger in myself, and how, knowing how important it is that you listen to yourself, that you listen to your gut. Every time that I have not listened to my gut, I have always regretted it. I found myself in a terrible position. The abuse, the fact that I allowed this person not only into my life, but for how long I put up with it. And this is a topic that I've been journaling a lot about it, trying to organize my thoughts and my feelings. And I did journal last night, and for the first time, I really feel like I was able to put into words what has been going on for the past decade of my life in regards to the abuse.
And you could see, she just said that she was journaling last night. So this healing, this self-reflection is something that was, as of 3 months ago when this interview was posted, it was still going on. And she was still trying to put things in line and understand where she was, where she felt, and what her feelings actually were.
And I was actually going to ask if I could read it, because I think it's really important. This topic is really important for me to word properly, word well, and so the people listening really understand what I'm saying.
Please, yeah.
It took me a long time to finally see the situation clearly. I've had to do a lot of soul searching and therapy around this topic, because allowing somebody to get away with harming me was so unlike me. The more I thought about it and analyzed it, the more connections I made between the abuse I was allowing to transpire and the abuse I've gone through in my past. They say that you end up marrying one of your parents, and no, I'm not married, but I found a very interesting connection between this abusive behavior and my mother's abusive behavior.
Now, in a previous episode, we did discuss her relationship with her mother. She would call her mother her manager. And it turns out that her mother cared much more about managing her than mothering her. That, I believe, was in the first episode of this series that I put out if you want to go check it out. Let's continue.
Even though they would both shake their heads and say I was crazy to think there was anything similar about the two of them, there definitely was. I realized that I was more afraid of being alone than being abused. And in order to be around that kind of behavior, it took me dulling my senses and numbing myself with substances in order to silence that rational voice in my head that was telling me exactly what was going on and the many reasons why I needed to get myself out of this toxic relationship and as far away from this person as possible. Somehow, every time I found the strength to get away from my abusers, they would always find their way back into my life one way or another. It was like being on a hamster wheel in this endless dizzying cycle. And the craziest part and the hardest part was to understand was that the physical abuse would come out of left field, but it was always when he was drinking, same as my mom. We could be dancing and joking, and then a switch would flip and suddenly it was on. Something would snap, and it was like watching a predator suddenly smell blood. I was dealing with this Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde situation. I tried to fight back in every way that I could think of. I took every approach, from standing my ground to attempting to calm the situation to running and hiding from it until he sobered up. Then, once he was sober, that good part of him would be back, and he would see the damage he had done, and he was devastated and apologetic, and it seemed so honest and genuine that I was torn. I thought back to everything I've done wrong in the past and the forgiveness I was shown. So I think a part of me felt an obligation to be just as forgiving. I desperately wanted to make him a better person. I wanted to fix him. I'm a really strong person at my core, and anyone who knows me was shocked that I would ever allow anything like this to happen. I have this bright, powerful light in me that comes on, but then it would dim around that kind of intense conflict. I found myself trying to be smaller and weaker just to avoid a battle because there's no reasoning with the unreasonable, and as strong as I am, I couldn't physically stand up to a grown man. I know I have a big heart, and I always try to see the good in people so much so that it's been to my detriment at times. The worst part was that by allowing the cycle to continue, it hurt the people I love who came to my rescue, and I cannot allow that to continue to happen. In order to finally get off the hamster wheel and put an end to the cycle of abuse with him and with other toxic people in my life, I had to remind myself how strong I am. I had to envision the life I want for myself, and most importantly, I had to take accountability for enabling unforgivable behavior.
And that was real. That was new. That was fresh. And you could tell that it was emotional for her to share that. That's about as deep and intimate of a look into her feelings as we can get.
Yeah, one step at a time. But that, it's been a 10-year dilemma and trauma after trauma, and just to be able to explain it at all, I never thought that I would be able to put it into words.
You said in there that you, and I think a lot of us, we tolerate abuse because we'd rather do that than be alone. And I think when you look back on that, you can beat yourself up to say, why didn't I leave earlier? And as you were saying, like, I'm stronger than that. Like, why wouldn't I stand up for myself? And at the same time, there has to be a sense of compassion for oneself to say you're just doing the best you could in that moment.
Coming from a good place.
Talk to me about that.
That was one thing that made it all the more confusing to me, is because I've known throughout the whole thing that I wasn't doing anything to deserve it. And that's why I say in that part, like, talk about how it would come out of left field. It didn't take me saying anything wrong. It didn't take me doing anything wrong. It didn't take mistakes or jealousy, or like, there was no catalyst. And suddenly I would be being dragged by the hair, and it was like, what just happened? What did I do? What can I do to make it go back to 2 seconds ago? Like, what's going on? And as I say, you can't reason with the unreasonable. And it was like the person that you love just was disappeared. I would look in his eyes and they would be vacant. Like, and it was terrifying.
She literally looks scared right now. Look at her speaking about this. This is probably some of the freshest abuse that she had dealt with, and the abuse that she still needs to deal with, to manage, and to figure out herself, and honestly, to heal from.
Terrifying. And I've always been interested in psychology. And so trying to understand what was going on. I mean, I was like going through the DSM, like, in my head, and trying to, trying to figure out, is it schizophrenia? Is it paranoid? It's like, what in the heck is going on? Because it was only when alcohol was involved, but no amount of alcohol could ever make me capable of doing something like that, especially over and over and over and over and over and over again.
How long were you tolerating this for?
Well, at one point I thought I had gotten out of it and gotten away from it. But it's like we talked about before. It's like this, it's like abuse they weave themselves like weeds into your life, and there's always something that they left behind. There's also always something that they have to come back for. There's always something that they find to keep that connection, keep you on the hook, keep that connection with you, no matter where you go. That they will always find you and find find a way to slither back into your life. So I went from, really wanting to keep the people, my loved ones, away from it to that's it. I've snapped. You don't pull out a gun and wave it around. You only pull it out. This is
Yes,
this
metaphorically.
is not real.
Yeah.
But you don't wave it around. You only pull it out if you're going to pull that trigger. And I finally decided, that I needed to pull the trigger, and I called in the heavy hitters and the people that were going to protect me and make sure that he had no way back in, that this was going to be a done deal finally. I always hoped that this was going to happen by me one day. And as I said, I thought that I really thought I had done it and I was capable of doing it by myself, but I needed an incredible amount of support and backup in order to make sure that there was no way for him to find his way back in.
So 10 years she was dealing with this abuse of her boyfriend and unable to get away. She finally got the help that she needed to escape. And then she still had to deal with stalkers and other types of dangers that she's about to share with us right now.
You write about in the book how you had a stalker, and through the isolation, through the, and I'm just like...
It just keeps getting better.
How does that feel, to be going through grief, to be isolated, and then be dealing with that on top of everything that you've gone through, that you've shared today?
They have that saying, when it rains, it pours. I feel that all the time. We go through periods of times where things are great, and then everything will go wrong all at once. And I don't know if it's Mercury in retrograde or the something in the air, like what is going on to make all of these things happen all at once. But the experience with him is the man who stalked me was terrifying. And this man was not just a stalker who was a big fan. Like, he was genuinely mentally unwell, and leaving message after message about how he was going to bring his katana sword and decapitate, and he was. I had to actually cancel speaking engagements that I had because he was flying and he was waiting for me there. Now, I've had stalkers before in the past who are all talk, right, and no action, and you go, after a while you go, okay, they're not really going to do, this is somebody who's just has the time to sit here and do this. But then there are those that you realize are incredibly dangerous. They mean what they say, and the FBI and Secret Service had to get involved. And I thank them both, all of them, from the bottom of my heart for getting him and for putting him away. He did just recently get out, so
wow.
That's
terrible.
It's I'm feeling, all these different emotions going on, while having I like the way you say it, excavated my life and written this book and put it all out there, very emotional topics. Then to deal with something like this on top of it, and knowing that he just got out of jail recently is scary. The whole experience was just to deal with somebody that's that unhinged is terrifying. It's because it goes back to that you can't reason with the unreasonable, and you have no idea what they're capable of.
Hayden's entire life was filled with every imaginable trauma that you can think of, and Hollywood was in no way any help. And as of this past weekend, she lost her life, which is why we put together this full series to take a deeper look into what her life actually looked like. I put together a full series of this interview, which you can have a look at right here, and I'll also link the original interview in the description of this video.